Um, just a little bit about the online peer mediation platform. You've seen I'm sure the platform online, maybe a Facebook or Twitter. What we're doing, our platform was a grant-funded platform for online peer mediation and resources that was funded by JAMS Foundation in 2014 to 2016. And then in 2016, we were taken over by the National Association of Peer Program Professionals, and we have 4 goals of our platform. Number 1, we provide free resources. So if you go to our online peer mediation platform website, you will see curriculum, you will see free videos, you will see all types of resources for conflict resolution sources. We also have conflict resolution modules that we provide for educators for their students who either have a peer mediation program or are looking to create a peer mediation program. We also do skill development. So if you have a peer mediation program and you would like to increase the skills of your students by doing role play simulations, we also sponsor those role play simulations, and you get to keep those videos, which is awesome. And then our future goal is also to provide peer mediation services to those schools that do not currently have a peer mediation program. We also provide, as you see now, free monthly videos. We will have a free webinar next month that I'll tell you a little bit about at the very end. We also have training that we provide for people that are interested in peer mediation coordinator training, student-teacher mediation, conflict coaching for students. So we have a lot of different things that we are offering in our platform. And so if you have any questions, feel free to we're going to have time at the end for questions, and feel free to ask. Okay, we'll probably have other people joining us. So David, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you now, okay?
Okay, great, Cindy.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so so now that we have kids excited about mediation and peace work, well, how do we get them to think about the future? Career education is being introduced younger to younger children and students, yet we always don't present them with practical pathways that they could take to incorporate mediation, conflict resolution, and peace building skills in the future work. Now, this is where David comes in. And I'm so excited to have David. David's a colleague of mine. He's also a friend of mine. And I want to tell you a little bit about him and his background. So David is a career coach, and he's the president of Forage Center for Peace Building and Humanitarian Education. David also teaches at the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, and he was a U.S. Fulbright Scholar teaching ADR and peace studies. David is also the recipient, I remember this, David, when you got the William Kreidler Award, and he is also the author of Peace Jobs, a student's guide to starting a career working for peace. So in this webinar, David's going to share strategies for engaging young people and considering their professional and educational futures where their mediation and conflict resolution skills can be applied. So thank you guys so much for joining us. David,
Thank you, Cindy. And is it Honor?
Yep. Hi.
Honor, okay. So it looks like it's the 3 of us right now. I don't know if there's anybody else. Cindy, do you know if anybody else is online?
Not right this minute, but we'll probably have some people.
Okay, great. So Honor, what I'm going to show mostly is a brief PowerPoint, and there are going to be some activities that we're going to talk about at a certain point. But at any time we're going through it, if we want to slow it down, speed it up, skip some things, have a broader conversation, we should do that. My conversation is mostly directed towards people who engage with young people, so college and high school. So it's kind of, but it does have applications to people themselves who are looking for work. So it's just not the people that are going to help other people, but people themselves who might have questions about it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll kind of operate from that point on in through my screen. And this just gives you a little bit of information that Cindy has. Do you both see my screen? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
And that's a copy of my book right there. I wrote the book in 2016. I spent a better part of 30 years working in conflict resolution. And I've kind of had I was at a meeting last night of kind of a group of Maryland mediators. And a person was asking me about my background, and it was very hard for me to tell them my background in 2 minutes or less, because in the course of 30 years, I've done so many different things in the field. I started off as a divorce lawyer where I did divorce mediation for about 10 years. And then I went and taught at a community college where I started a peace and conflict program, started a community mediation program in our county. Then I was a U.S. Fulbright scholar where I taught ADR and peace studies overseas. Then I came back and I went to the U.S. Institute of Peace, which deals with global conflict, and was there for about 10 years. And then the last 5 years, I've been doing consulting, working mostly with college and high school students. Throughout this entire period of time, I was often working with young people, college, high school students, but people are older. And, one of the challenges is that we get people really ginned up and excited about this work. And we're excited about it, and our enthusiasm rubs off. And whenever you're done the activity or event, invariably there's the kind of the Q&A, and students are raising their hands and saying, and, one of the things invariably that I get asked is, well, how do I get a job in the field? And I have to tell you, it has not been an easy answer. We could quickly say, well, you could be a mediator or an arbitrator or an ombudsperson or whatever. But, when you're talking to a 15-year-old or you're talking to a 20-year-old college student, that's a long road to go. And increasingly, as education has become more and more structured in our field, the educational hurdles to get to those things are more and more difficult. When I started doing mediation, I had a law degree, right? And those were the days in the 80s and 90s where you had a lot of lawyers and social workers who were kind of leaving what they were doing and doing this. But now I teach at George Mason and the School for Conflict Analysis Resolution, and you have masters and you have PhDs and you've got all this. So it's a lot harder to kind of cross those bars to get to those things. So one of the things I started to recognize is that we've taken a very limited perspective when it talks to students about careers, that we've kind of whittled it down to a handful of careers. When in fact, when we think about work, one of the things that we always talk in our field is the way that conflict and peace building skills and aptitudes can be integrated everywhere. So why not in every career? In other words, if all we're saying you can only be a mediator or this, what we're saying is that the value of these skills and these aptitudes are not important in other fields. So when I talk to students today, I'm increasingly telling them about being police officers and nurses and teachers and any career imaginable. There's a way of integrating this idea of building peace and skill. So my book is based on that premise. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. So just really quickly, this is kind of the densest, this is the most dense slide I have with text. I don't like putting text on slides, and I'll get this to you, Honor, and anybody else that joins us. But it just is just some quotes. One was Department of Education talking about, that students are not really necessarily seeing the link between careers and what they're learning. 45% of high school students felt ready for college based on the College and Readiness Survey, but 55% didn't. And it's for colleges where you get a lot of this career work that goes on. The 2014 Cooperative Institutional Research Program found that getting a job was kind of the most paramount reason why people go to college, right? It used to be you go to college to become enlightened, and that's still there, but it's about with 40% of students. Most students recognize you go to college, you get a job. And coupled with that is the realization that we don't know what jobs are going to look like in 10 years. So this idea that we talk about careers and career education is earlier and earlier in school. And it used to be career education was, and I had 2 kids who went through public school, was, career days, you bring your mom and dad, or you bring your moms or you bring your dads or whatever it is, you bring them to school and they talk about what they do, right? That used to be career day. But now, getting a career is kind of a science in and of itself, and developing a career. But then we're trying to predict the future that we don't know what's going to look like. So I talked about my book and kind of the reason behind publishing my book. One of the first slides I always show people about getting a job is that we have to often think very non-traditional when we think about work, and recognize that people have certain passions and interests that can converge with doing piece work that could make for many, very much fulfilling professional lives. So this is a coffee chain in Minneapolis called Peace Coffee. I think there are five sites, Peace Coffees. They get their coffee as organic, fair trade coffee from Central America. And I don't know the owner or anything like that, but the theme is definitely peace and the resolution of conflict and humanitarianism. You see that all over the place and everything. So when we're thinking about jobs, we're not often thinking about entrepreneurs, right? Why couldn't you have a love for the resolution of conflict and bringing people together? But you say, I also have a love for coffee, right? So why don't I open a coffee shop? This is Peace Food Cafe on, I think it's near Central Park. I took a photograph of this when I went up for the March for Our Lives. I went to the march in New York. I mean, a lot of people are in Washington. And of course, these themes of restaurants and so forth about trying to promote peace and justice are pretty prevalent there. This is an organization called Peace Lab. This is an offshoot from the U.S. Institute of Peace. Now, the U.S. Institute of Peace is a federal think tank established by Congress that focuses on international conflict. But for many years, USIP had a very strong look, it still continues, has a strong focus on technology and how to use technology to prevent violence. So looking at things like the use of drones and the use of social media and the use of the internet and websites and all these things are kind of part of that, right? And so they formed Peace Tech Lab about 5 years ago to kind of incubate that. So once again, I say, well, if you're an IT person and you're interested in social media, and you're kind of a techie type, you can work in the field also. You can do this kind of work, right? And this might be the end that you're working in. You're not the mediator as much as you're the person that's creating whatever it is that's needed, the web page or social media or whatever it may be. This is actually a photograph of my son. It's a little bit dated. My son is in the Peace Corps. He will be coming out of the Peace Corps, his close of service is in October. So he has now spent almost 2 years in Namibia, which is in Southern Africa. And he went to the University of Maryland and graduated in 2016 with a degree in mechanical engineering. So this was in the beginning of his service. He looks very different now. His hair is a lot longer, the beard is a lot longer and so forth. But once again, when we're thinking about the work that people can do, this idea of giving service, right? So it's Peace Corps, it's AmeriCorps, there's a whole range of things that some of them don't even require college. Like people don't realize that AmeriCorps, you don't need a college degree to go into AmeriCorps, right? And AmeriCorps is 11 months, Peace Corps is it's like 20, it's actually 24 months because you have some training involved in it also. So these are the types of careers also that people can start off and doing also. This is Peace Tea, right? You could sell tea, I suppose, if you wanted to. I've always loved this image. I took a picture of it in the subway in Washington. And of course, we kind of identified Mahatma Gandhi and Albert Einstein, right? Blue Jeans is a technology company that's like Skype, right? Or Zoom, right? And this was an advertising campaign they had a couple of years ago. The particles of peace from savant to savior. Imagine the collaboration. And once again, to get people to recognize that careers today are about putting things together, right? And, imagine a company where the values of Einstein and Gandhi were apparent. But it's really a metaphor for how do you find an intersectionality. So I tell students and young people, think about careers is that what you want to do is you want to find where things are connected to each other. So this is just some kind of things that impact careers overall that we all know. Supply and demand, overall trends in work environments and structure, and that's changing a lot. So we can't think about careers kind of in incubation or not incubation, isolated. I'm saying for the larger conversation of what the world of work is looking like, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's alignment between skills and education and need. They're aligning differently than they used to. I mean, one of the things that we recognize is that in some fields, getting more and more education is becoming important. In the Washington metropolitan area, for instance, getting a master's degree is what a bachelor's degree was maybe 10 years ago. Everybody gets a master's degree, right? So we're getting higher and higher educated. Now, that's good, that's bad, right? There are two ways of looking at it. But having that alignment between education and skills become really important. how the economy is doing, and globalization are all factors also. People always ask, well, how about getting a job as a mediator, right? And all you have to do is look at the Department of Labor, and you see here that the employment change between 2016 and 2026 is that there are going to be 800 more mediators in the United States. Just 800 more, not 8,000 more, right? It's actually, that's a 10%. It's growing pretty fast, according to the labor statistic, right? But one of the things to recognize is that to become a mediator today is becoming more and more difficult because of education, because of the hoops you have to go through and so forth. So, once again, these statistics are important. We don't do a lot of quantification of them in our field because conflict resolution feels like different from each other, right? But at least it's always important to kind of remind yourself that there is somebody who's studying this. The future of peace work. So there are three things, and I'll go through them quickly. One is recognizing that what we do is being mainstreamed, right? So, you talk about this job as a mediator, and increasingly what we're talking about is the manager who has mediation skills, right? Because our work environment is getting more and more diverse. When I was a 25-year-old, a diverse workplace meant there was an African American on staff. That was a diverse workplace, right? And maybe a couple women. Now, what does a diverse workplace look like? Whatever, right? All kinds of diversity, right? Diversity brings about conflict, right? So having people who understand conflict, who are in various positions within an organization, become important. Creative applications are going to be important. That is, one of the things that we have to recognize is that conflict is a humanistic thing. We're dealing with people who have needs and personalities and emotions and so forth. So this idea of what we call high touch and boundary crossers, these are themes that were developed by the author Daniel Pink. So if you read any of his books, I think I reference one of the books. They're really, really useful because they talk about the changing nature of work. But high touch means is that we're still conflict, even though we talk a lot about online things, online peer mediation, for instance, very valuable. But one of the things also to recognize is that it's working with people one-on-one, getting into their space, holding their hand, patting them on the back, reading their emotions become really important still. Boundary crossers are the types of people that cross different boundaries. That is, somebody who goes from one field to another field and finds the intersectionality. Somebody who can say, give you an example, what's the relationship between climate change and conflict? People say, well, I don't know. But we know that there is, because as the climate changes, there's more and more forced migration. If there's more and more forced migration, there's probably more and more urbanization. If there's more and more urbanization, there's more and more conflict, right? So that's an environmental perspective and somebody who understands about social patterns and migration who's bringing those things together. And then finally, soft skills are becoming important. And in fact, we lose a lot of soft skills in the last couple of years. Studies are showing students are getting more technically adept, but they're not developing listening and negotiation and kind of humanistic skills. Some people will blame social media because of that, Facebook, so forth and so on. I'm not going to blame anybody. I'm just saying it's still going to be important. I'm not going to read this, but this is, if you kind of look at this, it's an interesting quote because it's a quote by an IT person who says he doesn't want to hire technology savvy people. He wants to hire people who have soft skills. You want your tech person to come in and pat you on the back and say it's going to be okay, and I'm going to help you figure it out, and we're going to work through this. You don't want your tech person to just be technologically oriented. And so those are all conflict sensitive skills, right? We know that. Being able to listen, being able to show empathy, those become important for tech people. Future drivers of conflict, go this pretty quickly. This is just kind of a list of what people are saying in the future. So if you're thinking about work, we always have to think about the situations where conflict is going to exist in to create work. And a lot of this is more global than it's local. But you can see from this list, a lot of these things are things that are kind of we take for granted. They don't even seem like conflict issues to us, but they are. So the growth of income and unemployment, right? They don't, so as employment grows or not grows, as income goes up and not goes up, there's more and more social stratification. That brings about conflict, right? Climate change, water competition. Water competition's the next slide. Water world's the next driver of global conflict. If you're interested in global conflict, people are saying water is going to be the new oil, right? And so you you know what? You can live without oil, but you're sure as heck can't live without water, right? And so you're having conflict, for instance, through the Northwest Passage between Canada and other countries, because Canada says that's not international waters, and now as it's thawing out, ships are going through that, and Canada is saying, no, you can't do that. This is Canadian waters, but other people are not viewing it that way. So let's talk more about kind of population. So one of the things that when I'm talking to millennials, and millennials are people that are born anywhere from, we'll say, the early 90s through the early 2000s are millennials. I mean, people use different numbers, different dates, but they're going to represent 75% of the workforce. So one of the things I recognize is the workplace is going to be determined by the values of millennials, right? So the predominant culture in a place reflects the values of the predominant population, right? So as people that look like me retire, right, and people look like Cindy retire, millennials are going to replace those people. So what their expectation of what work is supposed to look like is going to change. 64% of millennials want to make the world a better place. And millennials, for the most part, are devoted to finding the common ground. Now, we hear about, we're in a hyper-politicized environment, so, we hear different things. But overall, if you did surveys of millennials, you would find that. This is important because millennials also are a lot more bipartisan than, for instance, baby boomers, right? So they're more apt to say, let's just kind of get this done. So that affects how work is done and what careers are out there. The other issue has to do with the gig economy, right? So there's a lot of different discussions lately about what work looks like in the future. So the idea that you'd have one job and you'd have that job for 30 years and then you'd retire and move to Florida, that's fantasy land. That doesn't exist anymore. It's more likely that through the course of your life, you're going to have a number of different careers. You're going to continue going to school because you're going to pop from one career to another. This is just not for technology people. This is for everybody. So increasingly, when I see people in their 20s who are doing conflict-related work, I will see them in Starbucks with computers, often Macs, and they're working on projects, right? And they may have a couple projects going on. They may be working for a number of different people. Maybe they're a trainer, maybe they're a project developer, maybe they're applying for grants. And between 24 and 34, on average, young people have 3 or 4 jobs and they look like that. That used to be, well, then in your 30s, you'd find your kind of real job and you stick with it. But now we're finding that's not going to be the situation. Even in your 30s and 40s, you're still going to be in the gig economy, working from Starbucks, trying to make sure you got your benefits, having a number of different jobs and so forth, right? There's been some discussion lately about the gig economy of whether it's going to pan out or not. So this is just a counter view by Robert Samuelson. He still agrees that we are going into the gig economy, but it might not be as many people as we think. All right. So now let's talk specifically about what a piece job is. And so what I kind of inferred in the beginning. So knowing about the gig economy, knowing about how millennials are, knowing about the nature of work, thinking those things, kind of keep those things present when you're thinking about this. What I say is that the world of work, when it comes to what we do, is kind of divided into 2 different areas. There are people that do direct action. That is, what they do is directly designed to effectuate the resolution of conflict or build peace or prevent violence. And indirect action, that is, it's not the primary reason they're doing what they're doing. It's an outcome, but it's more of a byproduct. So let me give you an example. If I'm an English teacher, right, or I'm a mathematics teacher, and I'm teaching algebra, people would say, well, you're not teaching peace, you're not teaching conflict resolution. But if because you are in school, you have an ability to find work for yourself, and you develop confidence and aptitude to be able to count or read or write. I'm in fact in the conflict prevention building if I'm your conflict prevention business, if I'm your teacher, right? So one of the things that we have to recognize is that there are a lot of people who are doing lots of important things who don't necessarily see themselves as people who are doing conflict prevention work, but are. The other thing is to recognize is that people work at the micro level, one-on-one, people work at the meso level, the working groups, and at the macro level, right? So if you look at these jobs here, these are the jobs that we always talked about in conflict resolution: diplomacy, humanitarianism, mediation, human rights advocacy. And I'd say we need to talk about more of these jobs: law enforcement, education, healthcare, the arts, science, IT, business, yada, 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 more and more jobs. Because what I want young people to think about, and I want everybody to think about, is that you can be taking your skill sets and making a difference, making a change in that culture by applying them and doing conflict work. Does that make sense? Right? And I think it's a hard thing to get around because we have, students want to go and get a master's degree in mediation or conflict resolution or whatever it is. And so they think, okay, that is preparing me for a specific job. But that's not what's happening anymore. It's preparing you by enabling you to work in an environment, develop certain skill sets that you can apply in many different ways. So strategies. Just real briefly, right? How we work with students, we want to prepare them for a world of diversity. Need to start by understanding oneself. I always get young people, anyone, to understand themselves. Like, you can do like a conflict styles assessment, right? To thine own self be true, right? You can give them Thomas Kilmann or something like that before people, and even, I've never used Thomas Kilmann in anything younger than high school, but students understanding their own way that they approach conflict becomes important. Exposing students to stories of other peers working for peace. One of the things that I think modeling behavior is one of the best ways of learning. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want to share with you a story about somebody who's doing some really important work. And you will make your own decision how much of that story you will accept for yourself, right? And so the stories that I want to tell you about, the stories that I want to tell you about, I'm going to come back to this, are not going to be stories about people my age. They're going to be people in their 20s and 30s. In my book, for instance, I have about 30 stories of people who are in their 20s and 30s, mostly, who are doing conflict work, peace building work. And when you are reading a book like this or reading the story and you're 18, 19 years old, to find out what somebody's doing 4 or 5 years beyond you makes sense. I can figure that out. But if I wrote a book and I was talking to you about Jimmy Carter or talking to you about Desmond Tutu or, great peace builders, Mother Teresa, that's great, but I don't know how I'm going to become Desmond Tutu or Jimmy Carter, right? So we have to be practical. And even when we bring in adults, we often bring in senior people to talk to students about careers. They are in a different generation, a different way of looking at it than younger people. Today, it's all about career design. This is more for college students, that today we're not thinking about getting a job. We're talking about designing a pathway and how you go about that. This is an excellent book about thinking about values and aspirations. Daniel Pink's book on drive. There are a lot of books that are talking about motivation today. What motivates somebody to do the work they do? So, in this world of plentifulness, sometimes hedonistic plentifulness, increasingly the message, at least, and those of us who do conflict work, is I want to leave an impact. I want to work for purpose, right? So that becomes a motivator. Meaning is important also. Emily Estefani Smith's book I would recommend also is a good way of thinking about what you want to do. People that are searching for meaning in the work that they do, right? And this interesting story about the janitor at NASA is really the kind of story that you just think about it and it just warmed your heart to think that somebody who is a janitor would tell the president that I'm working to help put somebody on the moon, right? It's a different way of looking about the work that we do. We have meaning in what we do. In my book, I'm just going to talk about my book for a second. What I try to do is I try to get students to think about, because I do talk about famous people, what those famous people were like when they were the same age as the people I'm talking to. So this is a picture of Mahatma Gandhi when he was 19 years old, and he was studying to be a lawyer in London. And my question to the students was, at 19, did he think he would be Mahatma? He was Mohandas back then. Would he do great things? He probably didn't know that. Could you be the next Gandhi? You sitting in front of me, you're 19 years old, could you be this? Does anybody know who this person is? Cindy, Honor, if you think about who it is. This is Jeanette Rankin. And so most people know Jeanette Rankin as, story behind Jeanette Rankin. She served just a few years in Congress. Both times she voted against war, right? One, World War I, when she voted against war with 50 other people. And then the other case was in World War II, where she was the only one who voted against it. This is when she was a social worker. She was a social worker. This is in her late 20s. This one, you probably could deduct, this is Mother Teresa, which is also St. Teresa of Calcutta, when she took her vows, right? When she was a young Serbian nun, her early days. Of course, she probably didn't know at that point in her life what her life would look like. This is Albert Einstein in his 20s, right? This picture here, which is a little bit harder to see, this is Martin Luther King right here. And this is Martin Luther King when he was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta, where Cindy is. And back in those days, students, during World War II, this is like 1944, Martin Luther King is like 16 years old and he's a college student. And the reason is during the war, a lot of colleges were letting in younger age students because the predominant male population was going off to the war. So Martin Luther King was a smart man. You know, he got a PhD from Boston University and so forth. But I always tell students, I said, if you sit in the front of the classroom, you're never going to stand in the back of the bus. So keep that in mind. So he's in the front of the classroom. This is another individual here that I write about in my book, Helen Muller, who passed away about 3 years ago. She was a student from Northern Arizona University. She did a lot of humanitarian work, went to work in India. She ended up working for Doctors Without Borders in Aleppo, Syria. She was kidnapped. She was missing for a long period of time, and she died in a bombing of her house by, I think it was, I don't know, NATO forces, or it was allied Jordanian forces. And the end of her life was pretty horrendous, and I don't want to go into it, but she was kind of like, there's a really interesting article in Time magazine about the values that she brings to kind of all the things that she did in this short period of time is something people to think about. So now I want to show you an activity, okay? So I'm going to show you two activities, and I'm just going to walk through them. And I can give you copies of this, it's not a problem. So one of the things, this is an activity that I've used mostly with high school students, but I could work it with college students too. One of the things that I recognize is when you have 15 or 30 students who come into a room, they know each other at one level, but they don't know each other at another level, right? So, you know who your best friend is, and you know what you like maybe in your sports, and maybe a little bit about your family and something like this. But you don't know what your values are. And, it's really hard to get 17 and 18-year-olds, 14 and 15, to talk about values, right? And values are generally tied with things that are important to them, things that they want to do, right? So one of the ways of doing it is creating an activity. This is called What I'm Seeking in a Career Bingo, is that getting students to think about the things that they'd want to do, which relate to values, and then connecting up with other people in the room who have the same values, right? So the idea behind it is that every student gets this sheet of paper. And as you can see, there is something that says, help people in need, work with immigrants and refugees. So every student has to go to one other person, and they can ask them only 2 squares. So if I went to Honor and I said, are you interested in helping people in need? You probably would say yes. I put your name there. So then I go over and I go to I go talk, and I can ask you a second one. So then I ask you, assist people who are suffering with effects of violence. You might say no. Okay, so that's fine. So I just got one blank for you. So then I go to Cindy, because now my strategy is I want to do 4 across. And I say, work with immigrants or refugees. And Cindy says, yes. Okay, so I got Honor, I got Cindy. And I asked Cindy a second question, trying to bring people together. And Cindy's interested in doing that also. So I got 3 in a row. I just need 2 more and I've got bingo, okay? After this is done, what do I have? Students know not only what they think, they know what other people are thinking in the classroom, right? You've now created a network of students who share the same values and the same interests. So a teacher could take that and say, okay, everybody who, raise your hands if you were interested in stopping gun violence. Raise your hand if you wanted to, halt climate change. Raise your hand. I want you to go now. Because students have already identified themselves as having that interest. And they've developed then a network and getting to know what other people are doing, right? So it becomes really the beginning of developing relationships that go to other things that they can do. I actually tell students, when you get 4 in a row or 5 in a row, you get bingo, but I let the game go until everybody gets it. Then I stop at a certain point, and they're usually like 4 or 5 people who haven't done it, haven't gotten to bingo. And I said, okay, let's as a class help them out. So then people say, well, I like that, and I like that, and it gets done. So does that make sense? Right? It's a good icebreaker for college and high school students, but they're running around and they're crazy and they're asking people questions and so forth and so on. But that's the idea behind it. At the end of the day, they've got this document that shows, okay, this is the other people in the classroom that think the same way I do. Okay. All right, second activity. So the second activity I work with, I've done mostly this with college students and less so with high school students. And this really has to do with entrepreneurship. So we often think about jobs. We think about getting a job somewhere, right? We don't think about starting my own job, right? Starting my own business. And I think you took 10 students and you said, what do you want to be? Probably 1 or 2 of them would say, well, I'd like to own my own business, right? And as you get into college, this idea of entrepreneurship becomes, I think, more and more popular, particularly when it comes to technology. You've got a lot of students today are thinking, I just want to kind of go on my own and do something, right? So the idea behind this is kind of the idea of how design companies work. So if you kind of follow the industry, you know that a lot of design companies and, kind of creative think tanks are kind of open space, right? Everybody kind of sits and they're divided into teams. So here, this company called Make the Piece, which is you work for Make the Piece, and all the students do, we're setting up a competition where we want to come up with a product that's designed to promote peace. And that product can be either a service or a product, something that you sell and buy, or a service. And whatever team wins is going to get $500,000. I don't give out any money, but that's the idea, right? I did this in Baltimore, so I'm using the example I did in Baltimore, okay? I did this at the ACR conference 2 years ago in Baltimore, all right? So then what you do is you break this group in the team, and then they have to then, number 5, determine the product or service, determine the potential market, decide an appropriate advertising campaign. So I give a big poster board. For this team, you should design a simple poster that describes the product, and then determine the overall impact on youth in Baltimore. I give them 15 minutes to do that, right? So they're doing all this that's going on. And I don't care what they do. They know what the objective is, right? And often what you get is young people think differently than adults. And I'll tell you some of the answers in a minute, which I thought were interesting. I got from Baltimore. So what I often do is I will give them a consultant. Like if I've got teachers and adults in the room, they may be their consultants. So that just kind of keeps them on track. And then at the end, every group makes their pitch. So what happens is 4 teams, 5 teams, you walk up to, you watch this one team, they make their pitch, and you ask them questions, you go to the next team, they make their pitch. If you really want to make it competitive, you could vote on which one gets the $500,000. I've never actually done that. But what you get are really interesting things. So in Baltimore, the most interesting thing I got was the students said to me, we need to spend money to put in air conditioning in all Baltimore City schools. And the reason they said that is because in the summertime, it's hot. When it's hot, you're more likely to be short-tempered, and people fight more when it's hot in schools because people can't cool themselves. So a really important conflict resolution or conflict prevention tactic is air conditioning in schools. I hadn't thought that, and the teachers in the room were looking at me and saying, that's not what they thought about either. But from a student standpoint, having an air-conditioned room is a conflict prevention strategy, right? So I had other students who wanted to set up community centers because they were thinking things weren't happening in their community, like, different, like a place to go and hang out, and other students would want to sell things and so forth and so on. But the creativity comes from the kids. It doesn't come from the adults. And then the students can think about, well, if I can do something like this in my group, in my community, what else can I do that I can work with other people to do, right? And this is also a great project that a teacher can continue with, right? You can kind of continue this scenario and say, okay, now I want you to go ahead and do it. I want you to go find a grant. Think about if this was college students, you actually could do that. Go find some money, go find a place you would do it. Kind of make it into reality, this project. So those are two activities. Questions on either one of them? I know you guys are both muted, but this one here or this one, or I know I'm just going to stop. We got about 20 minutes left, and I've only got a couple more slides and we take questions. No?
No.
Yeah, I love the bingo, David. It's awesome.
I'll get you the bingo. We've got to meet students where they are. I mean, we know that, anybody who's a teacher, that you can't get the students to come to you, you got to go where they are. This is what the peace entrepreneur is. They're going to have their own ideas. And I got to tell you, when I've done this half a dozen times, students come up with things I don't even understand, projects that they want to do. I mean, it's like, it's about media, it's about music, it's about something I just don't understand. But that's the idea, right? It's their world, not my world. You tell me what you can do, right? Kind of a thing. So, all right. A couple other things. One of the things I always leave students with is PEACE, right? This idea that passion, finding what your passion is, you're not going to find it right away in life. So it's hard to say to a 17-year-old, I'm going to work the rest of my life to do X, Y, and Z. But finding and working with your passion is important. I tell students getting education is important. It doesn't make any difference what education it is. You don't have to get a degree in peace studies or conflict resolution or anything like that. But the more education you have, the more you're going to be prepared to do this work. Engaging in activities, particularly extracurricular activities. So in other words, be it college, be it high school, doing those things, getting you out and about, finding mentors become important. Building a community. This is a really important one because one of the things that you find is that the work that we do, in some respects, is lonely work. That is often, we're doing work that our family members don't even understand, right? And, I can tell you all the stories. That's my answer machine. Wait, that goes off. I think about the times when I've talked to college students, and they will come and tell me, they said, I'm from this little town in this little place, and it has a certain political vibe, and I want to study about human rights, and I go home and talk about human rights, and my parents don't know what I'm talking about. Not only that, they say, how come you're not studying finance? And how are you going to pay for this debt, right? And they really want to do this. I say, you've got to find your posse. You've got to find the people that you're going to hang with, they're going to support you. Because it is going to be tough going. So find your community. And the last thing I do is finding your environment that you're going to work in. And what I mean by that is that conflict is site-based. It's about people. And you've got to go to where it is. So I have students all the time that will come to me and say, I want to study international conflict and so forth. I say, well, when are you going to move to Washington, D.C. or New York? And they say, well, why do I have to do that? Because where you are, you're not nearly going to have the opportunities when you go somewhere else. If you want to work with refugees, I think you got to go to where the refugees are probably, right? Kind of a thing. So people have to think about moving places. It's not unlike the actor who wants to make it big and they're from some small town in the middle of nowhere. And one day they pack up their backpack and they go to Hollywood. And they go to Hollywood and they start waiting tables and working at Starbucks. And you know what? That's better being there than being back home. Because even though they're waiting tables and a barista at Starbucks, they're in the environment. They see the connections. They see what's going on, and they will find something in that way. This is the video I'll show, but let's see if we've got questions. If we don't have questions, I'll show it. This is just a chart that sometimes I show people about peace-building pathways. It was mostly done for graduate students. This is about finding your sweet spot. I always want people to kind of work here. I'll get you a copy of this, Cindy and Honor, and whoever else is on the line, and that's it. So questions that people have, ideas, things that I raised.
No, I don't know if my audio is coming through. It was on mute for a little bit.
I can hear you.
Great. No, thanks for being here. That was really
Where are you, Honor? Tell me where you are.
I'm in Taiwan, which might be clear by the fact that it's daylight.
Wow.
7 a.m.
What are you doing in Taiwan?
I'm on a Fulbright, U.S. Fulbright to do a master's degree in international studies.
I was a Fulbrighter myself.
Yeah, so so that's what I'm doing. I'm just wrapping up a 2-year master's degree here in international studies, but my background is in labor relations. I went to the ILR school, and I worked at the Scheinman Institute for Conflict Resolution. So in the field, but definitely looking at, what you said about, coming at your cultural, your conflict resolution career from, an adjacent career point of looking at that from labor relations. So that's
how much
where
longer you have to finish?
Just 2 months.
2 months, okay.
Yeah.
And what's the university in Taiwan you're taking a degree from?
National Chengchi University.
Are you in a particular, you're in the Fulbright program, right?
It's kind of a strange deal in which my Fulbright covers my master's study.
So one of the things I suggest you do is send me your email address.
Okay,
so
great.
My email address will appear at the end. And I'm really active in the Fulbright Association,
Excellent.
Which is the Association of American Fulbrighters. And I write a column in the Fulbright Edge, which is the monthly newsletter of the Fulbright Association on careers. All right? So I'll send you the last 2 articles that I wrote about a career awareness.
Oh, great.
So, and thinking about careers. Now, when you come back to the States, where are you going to be coming back to?
So I'm not headed immediately back to the States. My parents just moved to Northern Europe, and so I'm looking at jobs there.
Northern Europe, be more specific.
Sorry, they're in Copenhagen, but I'm looking specifically in the Netherlands at a few more labor-related organizations.
Okay. Well, EU. I mean, you're going to, go to Brussels and Belgium, and you're kind of in that area there also. So that's great, and congratulations on the Fulbright. I mean, that's something that will define you the rest of your life, in a sense. And be proud of it and share it with people. So I'm glad.
Yeah, it's such a small community. I love how
so here's my let me do this. I think I'm going to show you this video. But you see, here's my email. You see it?
Yep.
Okay. So David J. Smith, davidjconsulting.com. So send me an email, and then I'll send you the Fulbright Edge, the last 2 newsletters.
Okay.
And you can actually join the Fulbright Association for free as a Fulbrighter. And you can get stuff there, okay? Cindy, you have any questions? Cindy?
Oh, sorry. No, but I love that you guys made a connection. That's awesome.
So let me show you this video, this last thing I'm going to do, okay? This video is a really interesting video. It's about 3 minutes long, and it is, it's already started. Well, no, it's not started. And it's a video for Expedia. So it's a video to get people to Expedia. I mean, my mother used to be a travel agent in the day, but nobody's a travel agent anymore, right? You go to Expedia and Travelocity. But it really sends a message to millennials and maybe the next generation. I keep forgetting what they're called. But there's some things about the video that trouble people also, which I won't tell you the things that trouble people quite yet until I show you the video. But it's kind of, it has a cool vibe to it. And it gets people to think about what they do with their lives, okay? So I'm going to show it. Let's see. It should come up. Do you see it? My screen changing?
I hear the music, but
okay. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, but you're not seeing it, are you?
No.
Why is that?
That is unusual. It usually plays pretty well with Zoom.
Let me see.
Do you want to go out and maybe play it from the, do you have the direct source?
Yeah, I'm at YouTube.
Okay.
What I think with a simple answer.
Okay, let me try.
That's
not going to work.
Peek over our neighbor's
I just did something. That doesn't make a difference, does it?
See, there's one. What I think
I hear it, but there's no movement.
Okay. Well, I'll send you both the link to the video. How's that? So we won't fool with it anymore. I'm going to stop sharing right here, and I'll stop it.
Every step you take brings the world one step closer. You'll narrow the influence of narrow minds. You'll bridge continents.
Somehow I can't even turn it down now.
I hate when it does
Anyhow. So I'll send it to you. And are you still there?
Yes.
Did I lose you?
No, we're here.
So I'll send you the link to the video, and you can watch on your own and give me your feedback on it, because I know we're coming up on 7 o'clock. And Cindy, I know you had a couple more things you wanted to say.
Oh yeah. So Honor, feedback. How was the presentation for you? We love to always hear back from our participants.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I like the kind of broader aspects of looking at conflict resolution careers and really different perspectives. And I think the resources that you connect with are very useful. I'd love to get a copy of that. Yeah, there are some specific things that really stood out. I think the way water is going to play a role in conflict resolution is something that's always been, this enormous elephant in the room of how does this really play into it, as well as getting, for me, it's kind of weird to think about teaching this to other students like me, but getting students to brainstorm conflict resolution ideas. I think it's always fascinating how other people view that, or take another interest and view specifically conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. So looking at that. What else did I have here? Yeah, and how I think conflict resolution is being mainstreamed. I really relate to that, and I see so many, especially in this kind of the day and age that we live in, how you deal with different types of people is really becoming such a fundamental skill. So I think I really like the approach that you take.
Let me ask you a question. How does it feel to be overseas when so much is happening in the United States?
It's really bizarre. On one hand, Taiwan is a very extremely peaceful place on the daily level, but on the international sphere, it's rife with conflict. So in a sense, I feel very similarly about this enormous lingering conflict. It's also hard because I'm not directly headed back there to the States. Yeah. And I was just recently in Baltimore for a week.
Oh, from Baltimore. Yeah.
And that was definitely a new experience for me in terms of, what does the States really look like, and how are people interacting.
It's funny, my son feels the same way. I mean, he's been in the Peace Corps for 2 years, and he came home about 2 months ago just for a week and was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then, of course, I mean, because of WhatsApp and everything, we talk to him all the time and so forth. So it's not like he doesn't know what's going on. But, living overseas for an extended period of time when there's so much polarization and so much trauma in the United States that we're dealing with right now, it's kind of a hard place for people to be when they're overseas, I think, at times,
Yeah.
So anyhow. Well, it was certainly nice talking to you. You send me your email. You have my email address. I'll send you the link, and I'll send you the PowerPoint. Cindy, I'll do the same with you. You still there, Cindy?
Yeah, that'll be great.
I'll send you the link and the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint, Cindy, you can distribute that if you want to. It's not a problem. Like the people who didn't show up, that's fine. Yeah. I don't have a problem doing that.
We have about 7 people that didn't show, but what I'm going to do is put it on our blog, and I'll
that's fine.
Your presentation as well.
Yeah, I might not get it out to you until tomorrow morning.
No worries.
I don't know, for Honor, it'll be not tomorrow morning.
No worries. Well, it was a great presentation. I definitely do an advanced mediation skills with my students, and so I really see this as being something that I could do with them.
Yeah, we have to. I think the hardest thing. I'll leave this one last. The hardest thing and the worst thing we could do as teachers is get students all, ginned up about it, all excited about conflict resolution work and mediation work and peace building work, and they said, "Okay, now you got to go out and get a real job." And that was what you did in high school. That's what you did in college. Now go get a real job. And I mean, I deal with college students, and I just don't want to tell them that. I want to say your real job can be working on peace and doing conflict work.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't want students to give up those interests and the things that really drew them to that, to say, well, now I've got to go get a job in whatever and do something else that's not related to that. You know, those were my college days, and now I've got to be an adult. You can be an adult and work on peace. It's not a problem. We just have to be creative in getting you to think about how you're going to do it. And you can be a phys ed teacher that does cooperative education, does cooperative sports. You can be a cop who does restorative justice. You can be an IT person who supports a social justice group. You can be a diplomat, right? There are so many different things you can do, right? And that's what we have to start getting students to think about.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Thank you.
And I
Thank
really
you,
look forward to
Cindy, and
seeing
thank
you.
you, Honor.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one more announcement for those watching my video and Honor. Also, we have our next July webinar on July 24th, and we will have Thomas Valenti. He's an attorney and arbitrator from Chicago. He'll be talking a little bit about the mentoring program that I was a part of in Afghanistan. We did it online. And so here's the title. It's Utilizing Technology for Intercultural Communication in the Virtual World, Challenges and Benefits of Developing a Mentoring Program in Afghanistan. So
I know Tom Valenti. He's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
So you got a good one next month. Yeah, he's a great guy.
He is. So Honor, thank you so much for being on.
Okay. Thank you all.
David,
all
thank
right.
you.
Honor, have a great day, and Cindy, have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.